Welcome back to another episode of the AI Transformation Playbook Podcast, where we move beyond AI hype to explore what it really takes to help organizations become AI ready before they become AI driven. I am Bannavti Suiseka, your humble host. Today, the conversation is about something I believe many organizations are underestimating. As artificial intelligence becomes more capable, leaders are spending a great deal of time asking what machines will be able to do. But perhaps the more important question is, what will humans need to become? My guest today, Savio Clemente, brings a thoughtful perspective on the human capabilities that become more valuable, not less, as AI enters more parts of our work and lives. Savio, welcome to the AI Transformation Playbook.
Eric, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Let's see what we can unpack today.
So, Savio, I would like to begin with the larger question. A lot of people assume that when technology becomes more capable, human value declines. I actually think the opposite may be true. As AI becomes better at producing answers, human judgment is becoming more valuable. Do you see it the same way like me?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I think it is a call. It's a clarion call. It's a directional call for all of us to use AI, not only respectfully, but also use it as a way to motivate, as a way to actually combine consciousness with that. So yes, it's intelligent. Yes, it knows certain things, but we are the ones who make the human judgment. I asked a recent friend recently, and I'm like, does AI have any consequences? If you in a job function do something wrong, you're reprimanded, there's a meeting, AI, there is no consequence. What AI, does even AI say, I'm sorry? Not really.
So what you just said is actually where I think many leaders are getting this wrong. They are asking, what can AI replace? But the better question may be, what should remain distinctively human?
Absolutely.
For me, that includes judgment, trust, accountability, empathy, and the ability to understand consequences beyond what the data immediately shows. So to you, which human capability do you believe organizations are more at risk of neglecting right now?
So if we go from a psychological safety lens, there's two things that always come up. It's trust and vulnerability. With AI, it hallucinates from time to time. It doesn't get data completely correct all the time. It needs human judgment and oversight in order to make sure that it does that correctly. And then, can you really be vulnerable with AI? And can it be really vulnerable with you? At the top of the hour, you introduced me, but for context for people watching and listening, I'm a 2-time cancer survivor. And at the end of the day, if you think about it, how does AI have its own survival skills? If it's unplugged, what then happens to the rest of the chain of data that it's trying to spit out? It just really ends. So it doesn't have that mortality fear or that ability to actually self-reflect or be self-aware enough to understand where it sits and where we sit. And I think we need to address some of those things within ourselves. So my main thesis point I'm a speaker, I'm a coach, I'm also a journalist, is performance doesn't fail first, clarity does. And at the end of the day, we as humans, it's an ongoing process of clarity. And I think for most people, they think just because an answer is given through an interface like AI, that's the truth. And at the end of the day, I learned a long time ago that truth is not only subjective, but if you find error in truth, you don't reject the truth, you reject the error. And I think to a large degree, we have to work in tandem with AI. I was on a recent cohort call and someone mentioned they're purist writers. And they're like, oh, I feel guilty for using AI. And I paused for a moment and I was thinking, anything that you ascribe the word guilt to, you need to, as Star Wars, as the character Yoda would say, you need to search your feelings on that.
I like that. Good to hear that you're a 2-time survivor. Courage to you. So I've noticed that organizations can become more efficient while becoming less thoughtful. Funny enough, they generate more, they move faster, they automate more, but they do not always improve the quality of their decisions. Have we confused speed with intelligence in this era?
Absolutely. Like I often tell people currently, is that we don't have a content problem, Eric. We have a connection problem. And the connection problem is with ourselves, and then it goes externally with other people. And with AI, yes, you think you're forming some type of relationship with AI. And yes, it's very thoughtful at times, it's relevant at times, and it's very quick and nimble at times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think to understand something, you need to reflect. And there's not a lot of reflection versus self and versus the actual interface that you're using. So 100% agree with you.
So let's go a little bit deeper into judgment. We know AI can provide recommendations, summaries, options, and predictions, but the final decision still carries human consequences. What separates good human judgment from simply accepting the most convincing AI-generated answers? And you said it hallucinates a lot. So how do you think, what can separate that?
Well, let's just say at the beginning, it's completely radically changing so many things. It's causing disruptions not only in the workforce environment, but in our own personal lives. And then it's also radically upgrading itself, GPT-4 all the way to all the other options like Claude and Grok and whatnot. And I think what is really apparent that I see that needs to happen is what I often tell my coaching clients is when something comes to you, yes, we all live in a very cognitive overload, cognitive pressure type environment. We're thinking from our heads. But I always tell them to visualize an elevator going down and it's going into the heart and going to the other parts of the body. Because at the end of the day, we have to filter that information, further mine how it actually relates to our human functioning, our human relationships, our human desires. And with AI, it's really spitting out a lot of content. Of course, you can ask it coaching questions. You can ask it even therapy questions. You can ask it medical questions. You can ask a whole bunch of relationship or relational questions. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really check itself. It doesn't really pause or reflect on why it's said. And then if you challenge it, it sometimes will apologize, but it does so in a very dismissive way. Whereas in human judgment, it's really about taking that pause, whether that is breathing exercises. For me, it's meditation. For other people, it's prayer. For other people, it's taking a walk in silence. It's really trying to figure out for yourself, how is that actually going to affect myself, my team, the organization? Whereas AI just gives data, and data points are great, but data points don't inform decision making. Data points just gives you the information, and then you have to do what you will. So I often tell people, really sit with it, have intentional silence. When I mentioned I'm a 2-time cancer survivor. I had a relapse in 2024. I was in the hospital. I had a stem cell transplant, and I was in a quarantine room for 29 days in it. And in there, I only had 2 things available: silence and stillness. And I think we don't take intentional silence for ourselves. People try to make it more complicated than it needs to be. It doesn't have to be meditation. It doesn't have to be yoga. It could just be sitting with your own thought processes, your own emotions, and actually feeling into the embodied aspect of that. Whereas with AI, it's just an interface that you're typing information to. It's not giving or feeding you anything beyond just data and information.
Wow, I like that. I like the distinction between fluency, because people can mistake fluency for truth. So an answer can sound polished, logical, and confident while still being incomplete or wrong. That's the era we are in right now. So we have this Enterprise AI Readiness Index. One of the patterns I keep seeing is that leaders often invest in technology before strengthening decision discipline. So they assume that the system will improve judgment automatically, which is never the case. So it may only accelerate poor judgment. So what habits should leaders build to prevent this type of confusion?
In my niche, I deal with healthcare leaders, and you can imagine it's high stakes themselves, their team, their organization, another human being. And I'm currently running an interview series that I just finished. I just wrapped with CEOs and CMOs. And it was staggering to me because one of them mentioned a data point that it's estimated that the US has $935 billion in healthcare waste per year. That's staggering.
Yeah.
Do you think that is, Eric? That's not just in equipment. That's in human judgment, human decision quality gone wrong because the pressure builds so much that you yourself don't know how to navigate further. And another data point is someone mentioned that when they implemented AI into they noticed that the nurses had to actually learn and understand how to use it, which slowed down productivity. And then they also noticed that if they had an AI dictation, yes, it would work fine when you're talking to the person, but if someone came in, it actually captured that. And then you had to change it and alter it, which actually added more time. So the bottom line is, I do think at the end of the day, people need to look at it as a tool. A lot of people are calling it extremely revolutionary. I'm probably one of them. As a journalist, I've seen the data. I've talked to enough people to know that, yes, it will change a lot. But I do think to a large degree, individuals are overestimating the effect that it can actually have on human life. We really, as Maslow coined, the survival needs that we need, the basic water, hunger, relation, those are the things that we actually need. Do we need to spearhead certain ways of optimizing our lives? Of course. But I've also learned as well is that sometimes the over-optimization is what slows us down because, for example, if you wear any wearable, you're tracking the metrics, but are you doing anything with the metrics? Or is it just a vanity metric? Is it just something to brag about or something that you are checking off a box? Are you actually integrating? And I think AI is challenging us to realize, yes, we have this information, but am I connecting with the information? Is the information allowing me to connect to other people? Is the information allowing me to flourish? Or is the information allowing me to flounder and feel like I'm actually swimming in a large ocean?
Awesome. So some executives might say, to challenge all of what you just said, they will think if the AI consistently outperforms people in a particular task, why shouldn't we rely on it? So where do you think reliance and human responsibility begins in all of this?
I think we have to use that lens that I talked about. Is this going to effectively move the needle for me and my team and for the organization? Or are we just implementing, as one mentioned to me, are we just implementing AI for AI's sake? Are we just doing it because everybody else is doing it and we just want to not fall behind? But are we really doing it thoughtfully? Mentioned that her 87-year-old patient doesn't even text. And therefore, you want her to call and speak to an AI agent who then is going to make an appointment with her, and then she's going to have to discuss her personal medical details with it? No, that's not going to happen. So are we making it advantageous for people, or are we just actually creating friction? Are we actually allowing people to actually see that it's an additive, or are we actually challenging them to learn a new tool or a new skill that they themselves don't really find value in? And I think we really need to question the value aspect of this.
So now let's move to talking about trust. So organizations often they treat trust as something that can be engineered through dashboards, policies, or transparency statements. But trust is relational. We still need humans to be able to talk about trust. So it's built through behavior over time. So how does AI change the way leaders need to think about trust?
I think it's twofold. I think if people just look at AI as just a means to an end, meaning I go there, I get the data, I then take the data, I extrapolate it, I see what fits, what doesn't work. It doesn't, even me explaining it to you, there is a lack of feeling involved in that. Whereas with humans, we're complex. We're actually extremely with our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions. We're not very coherent. And so I think when you use something like AI, and of course it could be used in many different ways, we have to be understanding of the fact that we don't always have to solve every single problem. We just need to solve the problem that is bubbling up for us in the moment. So I think when it comes to trust, not only do we have to trust the interface or trust the actual model that's in front of us, or actually the model that's been implemented, but we have to understand that it's evolving just like we're evolving. And so there needs to be a little bit more of an understanding and a respect for that. There are people who are anti-AI. Of course, you've come across them. I've come across them.
Absolutely.
And it's definitely warranted to a certain degree because people feel they're going to be slighted or they're going to be from their positions or they're going to be fired, etc. And I often tell people all the time that when it comes to something that is new in your life, beyond reflecting on it and beyond taking that that pause with it, you also have to realize what are the benefits that this could actually do for me. And a lot of my coaching work with executives, they often talk about this idea, well, I didn't come across this challenge before, so I don't know how to navigate my way towards it. And I often say to them, okay, I didn't come across this exact situation, but when has there been a time in your life when you felt the same way? And how did you navigate that? How did you overcome that? Or how was that even a roadblock for you? By resourcing what you've done before, then you can actually inform what you're doing now. With AI, it's a little different because it's like a new advent technology. Of course, it's not that new, but the actual models have skyrocketed in terms of their abilities. And so I tell people the same thing. What is this consternation you're having? What is it actually causing you? What are you actually feeling in your body? And what is it hindering and what is it helping? And so you got to ask those questions.
Okay, I agree. So one thing I often say is that AI doesn't create trust. So it's actually amplifying whatever level of trust already exists and the biases too. So if employees trust leadership, AI may be seen as a tool for growth. No. So if they do not, the same technology may be interpreted as surveillance, replacement, or loss of control, and that's where the trust actually comes in. So the adoption problem may begin long before the technology actually arrives. See? So what should a leader do before introducing AI into a team that is already skeptical or fatigued?
Yeah. Well, my main focus is really about how to improve decision quality after pressure or high stakes disruption, or in my case, after a crisis. We all want to solve the crisis, but that's not where you win or lose, Eric. You win or lose after the crisis. That's how you have to reorientate, reintegrate, and actually figure a new way forward. And so I think the key element there is really for executives to mine, how is this going to actually cause positive benefits for what we're trying to accomplish? How is this going to actually solve a problem rather than trying to create more problems by increasing knowledge base, by increasing access to information, and also by reducing, to a large degree, autonomy? When you tell people that AI is going to take over certain tasks, then people then feel that they're not valued for their input or for what they implemented. They actually feel like, well, why did I spend 6 months on that project when you're telling me that AI can then replicate or even do it better than me or do it faster than me? And so I think it's really about having an honest dialogue and also putting down to some degree the masks of the fact that you just want to implement these things because you don't want to fall behind, rather than actually saying, well, how we implement AI in your particular task, how is that going to make your life better? How's that going to make you feel good about what you bring to the organization?
So how can leaders tell the difference between genuine trust and visible compliance? Because people may attend training, use the platform, and still quietly avoid it.
Yeah, there's certain ways that people do that. As we know, the blame game, for context, being available, being forthright. There's a lot of negative qualities to that. I think it boils down once again to how you lead. And I tell people leadership is not always some person in a corporate setting. Leadership is how people value you, see you, mirror you, want to walk with you. That's what true leadership is. And if you don't reflect that in a very positive way, then you're actually causing more problems because people then not only don't trust you, but they feel that you just want to use them for the end result. And then if you add the component of AI and you tell them, well, jobs are going to be eliminated, this is what it's going to happen, then they feel that to a large degree, I thought I trusted them, but I actually don't because I'm very replaceable. a robot, a computer can do what I've been doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's move now to self-awareness as a leadership capability. And that was one of the reasons I was interested in speaking to you, your focus on self-awareness. So that may be one of the most underrated leadership capabilities in this AI era. So why does self-awareness become more important when leaders have access to increasing power tools?
Because at the end of the day, we're all living with other humans. If we were living with other robots, or if we were living with aliens from a different planet, then but we're living with other people who share. Yes, we might come from different regions. Yes, we have different foods, the different languages. But at the end of the day, we have the same basic human needs. We have the same basic human wants. We all want to be seen. We all want to be valued. We all want to be safe. And so when it comes to self-awareness, it's very important. And I tell people, well, they're like, well, I don't have time to do it. I mean, what don't you have time to do? I don't have time to meditate. Well, to meditate, do prayer or journal, do something simple. But I actually have a framework of mine, which is called the Adaptive Resilience Leadership Framework. And it basically posits that the environment or your situation sends you signals and patterns. It's the ones who ignore those things. And so I did a TEDx talk called 7 Minutes to Wellness, How to Love Your Inner Stranger. And people often think, well, that's a little strange. But what do you mean inner stranger? And I tell them, inner stranger for me was that person who never really felt completely connected to the external world, like wasn't bullied or anything. I just, as a young adult, wasn't really connected. And someone's like, oh, I know my inner stranger is that executive female that I want to be, that perfect idealized version, or that great mother or that great sibling, and I just can't be. And so I created like Lens. It's a framework within a framework called the Aloha Reboot. As we all know, aloha means hello. So it's a tool for self-awareness because it's just basic words. That's an acronym. So A stands for acknowledge. So acknowledge your situation. For me, I'm in the hospital, tied to this hospital bed in a quarantine room. Nurses are coming every 4 hours. This is my reality. Just acknowledge what's happening. Do a brain dump, vomit, whatever you need to do, but just acknowledge what's happening. L stands for listening. So listen to your inner self. Like I mentioned, means hello in Hawaiian, but in Hawaii, they actually have a healing modality called Huna healing. And in Huna healing, the kahunas, the kings of Hawaii, believe that the body not only sends you sensations, but it has consciousness, it has language. So we need to actually talk to those body parts. I call it the three brains, head, heart, and gut. So that's a tool for awareness, is L for listening. O stands for opening. So open yourself up to this, no matter what your belief system is, you're just exploring yourself. H stands for harnessing. So harness this, see what works, what doesn't work, make the connections, because not everything is going to work. And A, last one, is acting. So act upon this information, but there's a caveat. You need to have courage to act. And when it comes to with self-awareness, it's also part of what they call the models of change. It actually posits that it's not that people don't want to change, people don't know how to change. They don't know if they're thinking about change, pre-contemplation in change, wanting to from change, wanting to be in action of change. And so you need to have courage in order to act. And so I tell people, aloha, 7 minutes a day. Someone once said to me, I don't have 7 minutes. I'm like, one of the acronyms, and practice it for 1 day, for 1 minute. And it's called the Aloha Reboot. So that's a tool that you could use for self-awareness.
Oh, that actually, it resonates with me very well. I love that. I'll check it out. So AI can validate almost any idea, like you prompt it in the right direction. Right? So a leader who is not self-aware may use AI to reinforce bias rather than challenge it. And I love challenging situations. So they may mistake confirmation for intelligence. So how can executives use AI as a mirror rather than an echo chamber?
Question. So one would argue that GPT-4 was conscious. A lot of people were saying they were getting some strange responses when GPT-4, before they retired GPT-4, people were saying that it was actually really strange. And so a lot of people, like you said, is it a mirror? Is it capturing information, making the patterns, and actually then spitting it out and doling it out for you? I would actually say ask, like coaching, we always talk about double-sided reflections. So if you said something, I'm going to use a double-sided reflection to reflect that back onto you. Mm-hmm. So I would challenge people when they're prompting and when they're asking, when they're inquiring, do a double-sided. So say, for example, I don't understand how this will effectively help this organization by implementing A, B, and C, and D. And then say, or am I actually not seeing something that you're not seeing that I should actually question about myself? and see what response it gives you, because that's a double-sided question that you're asking, rather than a single prompt that is just going to give you a single
perspective. Yeah, like that. So I've been thinking about this through my work. Like, danger is not only that AI may hallucinate, leaders can hallucinate too. Human beings do hallucinate. So we can become overly confident in a strategy because the output looks sophisticated. And that is why self-awareness and intellectual humility matters. So do you think humility is becoming a competitive advantage in all this?
Absolutely. What are the 4 essences that people, I wouldn't say the word should, but that people can strive for? Trust, vulnerability, ability to be transparent, love is such a complicated word, so I'm not going to use this in this context, but the ability to actually be in what you do doesn't always have to have a religious overtone to it. And I think it's important for people to actually realize, well, what are the values? What are the strengths that AI is actually offering for me? And see if that has an alignment with who you are as a person. Because if you're someone who actually values context and values feelings behind words or feelings behind conversations, then AI is probably not going to be in alignment with that. But if you're someone who's just data driven and just wants facts, then of course it's satisfying that need for you. So it's really about resourcing what it is that's important for you, what that you actually feel is something that's of value to you, and what actually to some degree will move the needle. Like I mentioned at the top of the hour, I've learned, especially with my medical, is that we don't always have to over-optimize. And I think AI is creating this idealized aspect of human nature, in that we always have to find an answer. Sometimes the answers come in the silence and the stillness. It comes in the quiet. It doesn't always come when we need it. It comes when it is about to blossom.
So many professionals are not only worried about losing tasks nowadays, so they are worried about losing relevance. Losing your job is actually losing relevance. That's a deeper fear, though. So for someone whose identity has been tied to expertise, experience, or being the person with the answers, AI can feel very personal for them. So how should leaders address that emotional reality?
That's a tough one, because it really calls you to do the inner work. If you're someone who's just grinding all the time and wants just output, you're not really going to be thinking about what you're putting into your body. The inputs you're actually feeding within yourself. What are you allowing to happen? And so this falls into the realm of what I discovered once again in my medical journey, is this idea of metacognition, which is the idea of the thinking. For me, who's the Savio in the hospital bed, and who's the one who still has mental acuity, who still has vibrancy, emotional aliveness? Who's that person? And so metacognition is the thinking of the thinking. Who's running the show? So I'm here in front now typing or prompting an AI, but who's actually running that thought process? What consciousness is actually flowing through me? So it's really about wrestling with that. And honestly, Eric, we don't always have to have the answers. I know we're trained to have the answers, and social media has trained us to find different of people's lives, and we think that that's the full totality of their experiences. But I think it's holding the contradiction. I think it's holding the paradox and being okay in the not knowing, because we don't always have to have the answers in this moment. It may come to us or it may not. There's a great name and Rilke, and they talked about living the questions, that he said you have to live the questions as if they are things that you have to find rather than things that you have to have an answer for.
I like that. And following your answer, I think this is where many change management efforts fail. Like, explain the tool, they do not address the identity. So they tell people how AI works. They do not explain like those that working with people still matter. So what would be a healthier message from a leadership sound like?
I would say it would be more akin to basing it on some degree their strengths and their values, and also their personality types. We talked a little bit about that, and that's a little hard to do if you're dealing with a large organization. But I think it really comes down to the vision. What's the vision of why we're implementing this? And in coaching, we often talk about not goals, because goals are set time stamps in one's journey of what they want to accomplish. But a vision is how you want to feel, how you want to be, how do you want to reclaim what you feel was lost? So it's really about having that conversation about the North Star, or having that conversation about the vision of where we are now planning on going, so that everyone not only is on the same page, but everyone feels like they are included. I think there's a lot of exclusion when it comes to AI that people are just not speaking about. It's an undercurrent that people just don't want to speak about, because they actually think to some degree, well, I have to upskill, which is great. We all want to upskill, but they then feel, well, I'm not really valued for my contribution. And you don't want anyone to feel that way.
Yeah, I like the fact that you're insisting on the need for people to redefine how they understand their own value, rather than just reskilling themselves to use AI.
Yeah, not only that, but we've been trained as well, in circumstances as well, to think that we are our roles. I am an AI, whatever your role is, that's your full totality of who you are as an individual, or is that just one aspect of your living and breathing in this world? So we have to actually take what I call a psychological distance, a buffer between who we think we are and who we actually want to purport that we are, and allow AI to be that middle ground, rather than thinking that AI is going to be completely replacing identity.
All right. Yeah, I think there's a strange paradox in all of this as well. So the more powerful our machines have become, the more intentional we may need to become about being human.
Absolutely.
So what does becoming more human mean in practical leadership terms?
Yeah. Well, I have a Substack newsletter. My company is called the Human Resolve LLC, and I named it because what else do we have? Resolve and resolution in our lives. So I think when it comes to the human aspect of AI, it's really about non-competition. I don't have to compete with it, and it doesn't have to feel like it's competing with us. It's an additive. It's something that we can actually ebb and flow with. It's not something that we always have to feel like it's taking over. Yes, a lot of people are talking about it, but actual implementation of AI is actually slower than actually what people assume it is. Yes, companies and organizations are talking about it because it's a huge and massive technological boost. Eric, lived through the dot-com boom back in the 90s. And I also lived through the dot-com crash of the 90s, the early 2000s. So I understand the landscape generally from a technology standpoint. I think we all have to take that deep breath and actually realize, how is this going to actually inform my decision-making and my team's overall competence and the overall performance of what we're trying to accomplish? I think if leaders are just thinking about the fact that we want things fast, they're missing the boat. If they're thinking about that they just want to it can reduce costs, they're missing the boat. Because at the end of the day, what makes our lives valuable are interpersonal relationships with one another. If there was a survey done and they asked, it's like people on their deathbed in a hospital setting, what, now that you're transitioning into something else, what are you fearing? And no one said they made millions of dollars or built these businesses. They talked about the relationships that they had, that they didn't have, that they could have cultivated, things of that nature. So I think we all have to understand that AI is something that can help us, but we have to allow that to filter into the decisions and the choices, and also the partnerships and the relationships that we make.
Yeah, I think human has more to do with how we listen, like decisions we make, how we make them, how we communicate uncertainty, how we treat people affected by those decisions, and how we preserve accountability. Technology can support all of that, definitely, but it cannot choose it for us. So what should organizations actively protect as they automate more work nowadays?
I think they have to protect or even be more discerning as to how the implementation is creating bottlenecks, or is creating friction, or is creating problems for the people who are using them. If you don't allow yourself to survey how is this going to change the workflow and how that is going to create more hindrance for people rather than more progress for people, then they're not going to be completely on board. Not only that, but you're going to lose their loyalty. Not only that, but you're actually going to lose compliance. It's just a downhill slope from there. So once again, You have to have vulnerability, you have to have trust, and you have to have an honest dialogue. And how can you do that? Is by allowing yourself to really be reflective of how you want and choose to lead. And so I tell people all the time, what are the qualities that you value the most? What are the things that you see as important in your life beyond the scope of just a professional lens?
Okay, let's make this a little bit practical. So imagine a CEO is listening and wants to make sure AI strengthens, not weakens the human side of their organization. What should that leader do in the next 30 days?
I would think the first thing to do is you can be part of those meetings. Wonderful. If you can't, have HR and the team really do a diagnostic deep dive into what's actually the fears, what are the hindrances, what are the bottlenecks, what are the friction points that will create compliance with that implementation. And then really ask, and it's a simple question, what would you hope AI does for you? Ask that question. Challenge them on the best case scenario of AI's implementation. Obviously, everyone's going to say not being fired, but beyond that, ask them that question and then ask them and tell them to put on a hat, tell them to reverse that question and ask them for their fears. What are you fearing that AI is going to do beyond getting fired? What are you fearing AI is going to do? Because if you have someone who's very loyal to a company or an organization, they want to see it thrive. They want to see it flourish. They want to see it grow. And no one doesn't want that. And a lot of times, and you've probably heard this too, people will say, well, this corporate job is soul sucking. And Eric, I say to them, why can't it be soul searching? Why can't you find pockets of joy? There's an organizer named Maria Kondo. It's very simple, but she takes clothes and she asks people the question, does this spark joy? If it doesn't spark joy, she said, donate it or throw it out. Does this spark joy? So it's really asking that simple question, what lights people up? And by asking these deep dive questions, you actually get the true essence of what's actually telling for them, what's actually shaping their desire to be loyal or their desire to want to be in alignment.
All right. Yeah. I have 3 questions from the readiness perspective. Like, decisions are we willing to delegate to AI? Like those HR meetings, decisions must retain like human ownership. On what human capabilities are we intentionally developing alongside the technology? So I think you already had some few questions. Do you have more to add?
No, that was a great summary of what we talked about. Focus is always on the human aspects of any decision making because pressure is our judgment. And pressure allows us to not be clear with ourselves and other people.
Yeah, let me test this idea with you. So some people argue that emotional intelligence will become the redefining skill of the AI era. I think judgment may become even more important because emotional intelligence without sound judgment can still lead to poor decisions. So which one will you prioritize? Or is that the wrong distinction?
I think when it comes to human interaction, emotional intelligence obviously wins. And the research shows that metacognition, like I mentioned, the thinking of the thinking is really something that supersedes that. But I don't think we could have a discussion about emotional intelligence when it comes to an artificial intelligence platform. Yes, maybe as the models get better and better and it actually allows more inputs to come through, and maybe to some degree it becomes a little more conscious focused, which is being very careful by using that word. Don't know how, because it doesn't, what high stakes? It doesn't have any high stakes. It doesn't have any consequences. Yes, it could be unplugged or discontinued or retired, but it doesn't have any, there's nothing that it fears. There's nothing that it loses. It's all win and gain. So I think there's a distinction in how we're going to appropriate that to AI.
All right. So Savio, let's close with like a few questions, 1 sentence each. So what do you think is the biggest misconception about AI and human potential?
I think the biggest misconception about AI and the human potential is that we think that AI is just something that do for us, rather than I think AI is actually something that can inform what we do. So there's a distinction in the fact that we actually think that it executes only, but I think if you actually use it And what they actually suggest you use, especially when it comes to writing, is that you write and let AI not only refine, but allow you to think much deeper, much more thoughtfully.
So what's the most underrated leadership skill?
I would say the most underrated leadership skill is the ability to not listen properly. And that falls into the realm of non-silence. So you need to have silence in anything that you do in order to allow it to filter forward, because it doesn't. And for most people, they get stuck.
Right. So what's one human capability organizations should invest in immediately?
One human capability would probably be the aspect of wants and needs. I think people confuse that. We want to create more leverage with AI, but is there a need for creating this particular initiative? So
what's a habit every executive should develop?
I would say the habit they should develop is the ability to be self-reflective. I think a large portion of, including myself, extremely subjective, but not objective themselves.
So what should leaders stop outsourcing to technology?
I think leaders should stop outsourcing the ability to just get things done faster. I think we have to actually put, in order for it to be more thoughtful in its initiatives or its responses.
So what's one word that you use to describe the future of work?
One word I would say is integration. I think to a large degree, we all feel like it's all or nothing, and we don't actually do the work in order to see what works, what doesn't, how do we integrate, how do we non-integrate.
So what's one book you recommend every leader should read?
I would say it probably be the same book as Steve Jobs, which was Autobiography of Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. He's a yogi who actually talked about deep thoughtfulness in the work that he did.
Okay. So at the end of every episode, I ask our guests this same question. So I think I mentioned earlier on, the Enterprise AI Readiness Index currently examines 6 pillars: executive leadership, AI governance, workforce readiness, data and technology, risk and security, AI strategy. If you could add one additional pillar, what would it be and why?
I would say transparency.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very undervalued trait. I think a lot of us talk about authenticity, but there's a difference between authenticity and transparency.
So imagine every CEO, founder, or board member and transformation leader are listening to us right now. What is that one message you hope they remember long after this conversation ends?
Goes to my thesis, Eric. Performance doesn't fail first, clarity does. We have to have more clarity in how we speak, how we do, and how we think.
Okay. So before we close, where can people connect with you and learn more about your work?
Sure. They can find me on my website, savioclemente.com, SAVIOPCLEMENTE.com. I have my keynote work there. I have a couple more spots left for 2026. I have my book. I have my coaching information, but I also have every Wednesday a Substack called The Human Resolve, where I talk about head, heart, gut intelligence. And currently I just wrapped the CEO and CMO series. If they want to find me on social media, I'm at The Human Resolve.
Okay. All right. This has been a thoughtful and important conversation. So what I appreciate most is that we did not treat humanity as something AI makes obsolete. And I love that so much. So we treated it as something leaders must develop more intentionally. So if you enjoyed today's podcast episode, subscribe to the AI Transformation Playbook Podcast, share it with another leader, and continue the conversation with us. Remember, AI transformation is not about replacing human intelligence. It is about building organizations where technology strengthens judgment, trust, leadership, and meaningful human contribution. We'll see you next time. Thank you.